Will Shannon here from Pinnacle Health in Sydney. I want to share something with you today that you might actually find fascinating. How do we know what herbs do? How do we know if they work? What herbs do what? Well, there's an old saying that you don't need to reinvent the wheel. So we live in 2023 AD at this recording. Now, we've had writing for about 5,000 to 6,000 years. The first writing, I hope I'm on camera, is Sumeria. Let me just change this pen color here. It's defaulted back to a blue. So, we had Sumeria. You might have heard of the ancient Egyptians. We had the Greeks. We had the Romans. Then we had modern day. Now, when we look at a herb, we look at, in modern day, if you qualify in this field, you have to know the clinical studies, double blind studies and so forth. So you have to look at the studies as to what the herb does. Now, there's one other main way, a few ways we do it, traditional use. In fact, they call natural medicine often traditional medicine, don't they? So before, you could say Western scientific medicine, reductionist medicine, pharmacological medicine in the modern day term that we use it, and I don't mean any of those terms in any way critically. All we had was the plants before we had the technology to work out what came out of those. So as an example, back in Sumeria, who we believe was the first writing we've discovered on the cuneiform clay tablets, we have opium. What's opium poppy? Painkiller. You've probably heard of morphine, heroin, synthetic derivatives like fentanyl. Now, what else? What are some of the other major traditions where we have documented writing? Now, before writing, what did we have? Or without writing, what did we have? We have oral. When they invented the printing press, actually I won't go into the history of the printing press, that's going to get too technical, but when they invented the printing press, the first book they printed was the Bible. Even before they had the Bible on the printing press, they had to copy it letter for letter. Make sure that every single verse was accurate. So, what have we discovered moving forward to Egypt? Second major civilization to talk about is something called the Ebers Papyrus. I'm going to load all this onto a PowerPoint and teach you succinctly. Edwin Papyrus, Hurst Papyrus, Berlin Papyrus. We've got about, some of these documents have 800 herbs. I want to teach you this stuff. There's not a lot of this on the internet. There's a lot of people with home remedies, but this is where the goods are. Greek, Dioscorides, Galen. In Rome, we had Pliny the Elder. Now, what did these people have in common? Well, they were the legendary herbalists of their time. In fact, Pliny the Elder, as an example, was the herbalist for the emperor. You've got to know what you're doing by the time you get there. Now, the modern day, we'll just go to the modern day. So, I talked about coal pepper. Wrote a classic book in the 1500s. Another name I'll mention, Samuel Thompson. Now, just to show you how powerful herbs are, what's the herb that's been all over the internet that every herbalist has heard of, that's been going viral? He had 2 herbs in his medicine cabinet. Two primary ones. Cayenne pepper. What's cayenne pepper do? Well, it does a lot of things, but what's it known for being hot? Measure this on a certain scale, Scoville. In fact, I've got at least 7 or 8 times of pepper easily. What do we measure? When things are hot, what do? They move blood. So you'll hear a lot of things on the internet about cayenne pepper. This is its primary use. In fact, good old school herbalists, if I may include myself in that, are taught to always use a little bit of cayenne pepper in formulas to move those chemical compounds around the blood. What was the other herb that Samuel Thompson had? You probably haven't heard of this if you're in Australia. If you're in America, you might have lobelia. It's banned in many countries. It's one of those herbs that people thought was wonderful. back in the day. It was used for different respiratory type conditions. Too much lobelia is what's called an emetic. That's a new word. An emetic will make you vomit, empty the contents of your stomach. So, in brief, what have we learned? 2 types of herbs, 2 types of ways to classify herbs. Clinical use, traditional use. Clinical studies have only been around recently. A lot of good journals we could go into that I could teach you. Traditional use. Lots of great herbalists through civilization. I taught you about Sumeria, Egypt, and we'll go through scroll by scroll. What did I say were 4 common ones off the top of my head? I told you about the Ebers papyrus. I've read all these, by the way. Won't bore you endlessly with them now. Hearst, Berlin. Then we fast forward. We had Rome and Greece. First, and Rome. Talks about Pliny the Elder, just as one person. Pliny, P-L-I-N-Y. Dioscorides, Galen. We talked about Culpeper. Talked about Thompson. Now there's lots of good people through history, but these are some of the greats that I just thought I'd rattle on the top of my head that we're going to go through one by one at some point.